What's going on, everybody? Billy here, checking in for another episode of the Log Talk podcast. So thanks for joining us this week, and thanks again for following along throughout this entire hunting season. It's been a very exciting one, and hopefully we're heading into a weekend of a lot more excitement. So we're heading to Pennsylvania, so that's what this podcast is going to be about. I sat down with my wife's cousin, Dallas, one of the key guys of this hunting group that's going down to PA for the weekend. So Dallas and I, we were chatting early last week about the trip and trying to game plan. We've got a big group of us going this year, a little bit bigger than normal, so a lot of planning that needs to go into this trip. So we figured it'd be cool to sit down and kind of chew the fat and discuss kind of what the history is of this hunt, but also what is going to be the strategy with having the size of group we do, and how we're going to approach each one of the hunts that we do as a unit down there in the mountains in PA. So pretty fun episode. Fun to hear some of the history of this hunt that I really didn't know. You know, I've been on this will be my fourth year going, but didn't really know all the backstory about how it started, and I think that's a key part to understanding. A lot of these hunts are big traditional hunts for families, so I think it's pretty cool to hear from Dallas, you know, kind of how this all got started and what this hunt means to them as a family. So hope you enjoy this. Quick update for everyone who is tracking Big Jim and I think we're trying to call it the Harvey Brothers Whitetail Championship. So if anyone's tracking along, you know, I pulled out ahead significantly over the Thanksgiving weekend, so I am up 7-5 at the moment, and Jimbo's struggling. I think he's stressed out. You know, he doesn't want to be on the podcast. He's, you know, skipping out on family hunts like Thanksgiving. So I don't know. He's lost. He's not quite sure what he's doing, and he's really struggling to put another deer on the ground, and 3 for the win to be exact. And I've got 3 days in Pennsylvania with a buck and doe tag in my pocket, so the pressure's going to be on you, Big Jim. So when you listen to this, I hope you start sweating and have a hard time sleeping, because I am just comfortable and happy right now. So having some fun with that. Again, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you like and follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and make sure, if you could, to share with your friends. I'm kind of watching the stats, and I get very excited to report that we're over 1,000 downloads now. For me, it's a big monument. I'm pretty excited to see we've got a lot of consistent listeners. It looks like we're averaging right around the same numbers for every episode. So if you are one of the folks that's listening to this and you are following along and participating and enjoying it, I really appreciate it. And I have gotten some feedback, good, bad, and indifferent, and I also appreciate that. It's something that I want to continue to make this podcast better and better. So without that feedback, don't know exactly what to do, or I just assume everyone likes it because I enjoy it, but that doesn't mean that everybody out there is enjoying it. So please don't hesitate to shoot us a message on Instagram or Facebook, or if we're personal friends, call me and say, hey, you're an idiot, stop talking. That is some of the feedback I've gotten, is that I talk too much, which is not a inaccurate statement. So I need to listen to what I'm saying. We've had this conversation before, people. So that is that. Moral where I was going with that, share it with your friends. So if you have friends, if you like the podcast, make sure you're, you know, when you're with your buddies, when you're with your family, whatever, anybody you know listen to podcasts, likes hunting podcasts, please make sure you share it. I want to grow this. I want to try to do it as organically as possible and not do too much with marketing and everything else. We'll probably start dabbling a little bit of that, but also don't want to be over the top, because I think that the true message of this podcast is we're just a group of guys, regular guys here in New York, and want to share our adventures and our experiences with everyone, as well as get all of you, the listeners, engaged to get on here and share your stories. So all good stuff. Appreciate everyone's support. Again, the reminder of the links in our bios that will take you to some of the stores that we're working with. So if you're doing Christmas shopping this holiday season, please make sure to use our links. Nothing extra is needed. You just need to click on our link in our bio to get through the store, and then anything you purchase, we'll get a little cut of that, and it'll help us keep this thing up and running. So thanks again. Appreciate it. We're heading into the last weekend of season here in New York. We got muzzleloader, and that will close on Tuesday. So good luck to everyone out there. We're planning on doing some day-by-day stuff when we're in PA. So we'll hope to maybe next week after we get back, maybe end of next week, we'll be posting an episode with kind of day by day of the adventures we have down there. So have a good weekend. Thanks for listening, and good luck, everybody. Feed 'em. All right, we're recording. What's up, Dallas?
How you doing, Billy?
Pretty good. So we're back for our second podcast with you. That we may get interrupted by the girls here at some point when they get home from school. I'm sure there'll be a cameo made.
When Emma gets home from school and finds out that you're here, she's going to come right down and check and see what we're up to.
Yeah, she kind of takes over. She kind of takes over the show.
Yep.
Those two girls are a piece of work. So Dallas and I are sitting here. We're getting ready for our Pennsylvania rifle hunt, which is coming up on us for next week. So we're sitting here. This is Friday the 6th of December. So the planning is ramping up, and really, I guess we're kind of a little bit late into the planning stages, but things have been up in the air a little bit on who's going, how many people, what the weather is going to be. So kind of starting to get a clearer picture of that. So Dallas and I were chatting yesterday, and I think it'd be kind of cool to sit down and start just kind of do some planning, but talk through the planning of this hunt and what it's going to look like for us. So I guess first, like we were just chatting before we push record, is what's the history of this hunt? Because this is not something that I've always been doing. This is kind of a new thing for me with you guys.
Yeah, you joined us probably about 4 years ago. That's when the group started getting bigger. So we've been doing this on and off since the first time I went to PA for their gun season opener. Originally was 1996, and that was in a different area further south. I think that was Elk County. It was actually Sarah's Uncle Mike that got us to go the first time. Mike had gone, he had a tradition with some friends that they went there, I don't know for how many years, but they went all the time. And that was back in the Orange Army days where they went, it was a free-for-all.
Yeah.
It was a war. It was the kind of thing that you hear about in Pennsylvania. So at that time I was 15, so I couldn't hunt with a gun in New York yet. So Dad got us in on that group one time, which was just 3 other guys. So we drove down on a Sunday afternoon, set up Mike's wall tent with a stove. And we used to take that on every hunting trip. That thing was awesome. It was a little bit of work setting up, but he had a Chevy conversion van with captain's chairs in it. So you could fit like 7 guys in there, plus the wall tent, which had like 12-foot 2x4s that could fit the length of that van down along the edge.
Really? You put all that stuff in the van?
Yeah, you could open up the back door and put a 12-foot 2x4, I think it was 12 feet, through the back, up along, underneath the bucket seats. And all our gear,
That's the ideal hunting rig right there.
It was, other than not having 4-wheel drive, that thing was awesome.
Right.
It was great to ride in. So that first year we went down there with them, and me and Dad got quite a taste of Pennsylvania hunting, and we were just talking about it the other day, because me and Dad just went down for opening day in Potter County last week. So we get down there, set up camp. We go out to do a little scouting because we've never been there. We have no idea what's going on. And at that time, 1996, you're not doing e-scouting.
No.
I don't even think we had a map. So went down and seen some pretty good buck sign. So the next morning we wake up and there's just, it seemed like 1,000 headlamps going up the mountain out of camp there. So it was a pumpkin patch. There was people everywhere. So we sat there maybe an hour and a half, and Dad took us on a excursion, and we got away from the people, and I killed a nice little 8-point buck, and that trip was made. But even having success, we never really wanted to go back into that situation before. So Dad and Mike scouted out a new area in Potter County, which is where we're going. It's the same place that where we're at now. We went down there in, I think it was 2000 or 01, and that was before antler restrictions. It was like one of the last years before the APRs.
Mm-hmm.
And so same deal, Mike's conversion van, his wall tent, hunted I think 3 days. Didn't really have a clue what we were doing. We were new to the area, and again, still we didn't have good maps or GPS or anything really. We were just kind of wandering around. Dad did kill a spike. We've seen a few bucks, but at that time there was still a lot of people lined up to hunt down there. you know, you'd go down on that main forestry road that we drive now, and you go through and you'll see 6-8 trucks maybe.
Yeah.
Back then they were still lined up and down that road. All those gates were closed, so you had to walk from that main road.
So were they doing the timber cutting at that point, or?
I don't even remember, but probably they were.
That's almost 20 years ago.
Yeah, I was only a year or two out of high school at that time.
So things were fuzzy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was more of a drink beer
right.
and have, there was definitely times back then where I was wandering around the woods in the middle of the day, hours on end, going, what are we doing here? Is it going to be dark yet so we can go home and, back to the tent and drink beer and eat food and, be warm and stuff. So,
yeah.
So the next time, so right after that, a year or two later, they instituted the antler point restrictions. And the next time we went down was 2004, and it was already a whole new world. There was far less people hunting for whatever reason. I don't know if they just moved to a different area. I know a lot of people weren't happy with the antler restrictions. There was 6 of us that went. And back then, we just would split up into groups and just walk around and go hunting, and just pairs of 2. Again, still feeling things out and just kind of trying to learn the area, but still not really having a clue what we're doing. Yeah. Again, no maps, no GPS, no cell phones. I mean, it was just, but we got into deer right away. We, like I say, it was evident by the end of the first day that things were not like they used to be down there. There were more deer. There might not have been more deer, but there was more bucks. We spotted in 3 days, 6 of us came up on 3 shooter bucks, all like nice 2-year-old 8-pointers that at that time that we would have been happy to shoot around here.
Yeah.
And I was able to connect on one nice 8-pointer that, I mean, still to this day, I'm as proud of that deer as almost any that I've ever killed before, because of just the situation that you're in. And that was that was such a great time, and it's such a great experience. And back then we didn't know, we weren't packing out deer yet, so me and John damn near killed ourselves trying to.
You pert near killed yourself.
In the pouring rain, which is why I was able to get the deer, because we were still hunting. It was raining like crazy that day. I shot this deer over the side of one of those steep ridges, and he ran down, of course.
Yeah.
He died head over heels down into just a mess of shit. Had to go down there and drag him out, the 2 of us. Took us probably 2 hours or so. We didn't think we were ever going to get out of there.
Yeah. Well, in the area that we're hunting, all of the roads are at the top of it. There's no roads that you can get a vehicle to in the bottom. So it's, it's not a lot higher elevation than where we are here in Western New York, but you're hunting the tops of the mountains down instead of hunting the bottom of the mountains up, or in the middle. Like, there's no middle ground. It's just top and down. Exactly.
You're hunting down. And so, and for that reason too, a lot of the people that do hunt around there are just hunting the ridge tops and just over the sides, kind of. There is private land in the bottom, and in particular where I was hunting at that time. We're kind of looking at a map here. This is where I shot that deer. So you can see we're not too far from private land where there was people coming in from the bottom there.
Oh, okay.
But we didn't have access to that. I think right in there is where I shot that deer, and he went down in this hollow here.
Yep. So did you access that from up here?
Yeah. Okay. And that was one of the other revelations we found, was that we used to, the first couple times we went down to PA, we went for their opening day and then hunted like 3 days. And at that time, these gates were closed. And we found out the first day down there, hunting the second week, that they would open these gates the second week, and it gave you access to a whole bunch of new property that you didn't really have good access to before. So, so that was another thing where it's like, oh, okay, there's a lot more stuff we can hunt here now. So that was 2004, and after that, it pretty much, at that point is when it pretty much became a yearly tradition, and we've been down there. I think I've missed maybe 3 years since then. I think when Ava was little, and there's a couple times when I went out west where I didn't go, but I've been there almost every year since then.
Yeah.
And it's just evolved over the years to the point where it used to be kind of just fun to get out and go and just do something else, to the point where it's become really pretty much my favorite thing to do.
Yeah.
As far as whitetail hunting. Every year, it's the thing that I look forward to the most. It's probably the most fun I have. It's really it's a carefree trip.
Yeah, it is.
It's
a
not, blast.
It's not preparing for a trip across the country where so many things can go wrong and all this stuff you got to plan for, and you're not backpacking in and sleeping out of a tent. Like,
yeah.
And I think at this point in our lives, and I'm certainly seeing it now, being that I've got a young one of my own, is that like we can totally do more of these hunts, where right now in this stage of life it's very hard to do those Western hunts.
Yeah.
And it will continue to be for the next 10, 12 years, where we could go to PA or go to the Adirondacks or go to Vermont, Massachusetts, whatever. You go up there, New Hampshire, you can go have those adventures, and you don't have to drive across the country.
Yeah,
and that's my first trip down here to Pennsylvania with you guys. I was like, because I heard you guys talk about it. So for maybe 3 or 4 years, while I was with my now wife Sarah, hearing you guys talk about it, I'm like, man, that trip sounds awesome. I didn't want to invite myself, but I was very anxious to like get that opportunity to go with you. And then my first experience was like, you get down there and you're like, wow, this place is unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's a lot like the area that I grew up hunting, but it's so much like the amount of land you have to wander.
Yeah.
It's like endless.
Yeah.
And that's what really struck me when I first experienced it.
This place is the very definition of big woods, public land. There's almost no boundaries. If you do get down in the bottoms where there are roads, you'll find a little bit of public or private land, but you can just go forever.
Yep.
And the thing about it, and like having you come along too, is that for years I've been trying to grow this group. We've had we've had the core group has been obviously me and Dad and Brian, and then John's been with us since all the way back to 2004, but he's been kind of in and out a little bit. And Mike was part of the original group, but he doesn't really do any of this kind of stuff anymore.
Right.
And basically what happened too is me and Brian, when we were kids, we used to go on hunting trips almost every year to some place, and we were the only kids. It was my dad, it was Mike Weslowski, it was Chris Miller, Neil. It was that group of guys that is in like their early 60s now, late 50s, that most of them, except for Dad and Chris, they're the old guys now, and our generation has totally taken over and totally passed on that tradition, and grown it, for that matter too. And I mean, I give them a lot of credit for getting this started. Especially my dad. We could have just sat there and hunted on the farm our whole lives. If you want to go and shoot deer and
you have
see
a
deer
lot of
and
opportunity
have a chance to shoot big bucks, there's no reason to ever leave Bear Road if that's all you're interested in.
Yeah.
But he's always been kind of an adventurer too. He's been out west many times now. You've been out there with him. So to his credit, he's seen the need, I think, to get out and explore areas around here more.
Yeah.
Around the Northeast. And I've been saying it for a few years now too, that we really can just hunt within 6 or 8 hours of where we live. We can access so many different states and so many style of hunts in the Northeast. I mean, I love chasing whitetails, and I expect to get out west and go after muley and elk again, probably, hopefully not too much longer, but there's just so much you can do from here, and this trip is really at the core of it. This is kind of where we cut our teeth and learn how to do all this type of hunting. A lot of the other things that we do now are based on what we learned doing this style of hunting here in Potter County, Pennsylvania, which still to this day, when I tell people of the fact that we go here and we actually enjoy hunting here, the first thing is it's always, is there any deer there? Is there any bucks there?
Right.
Are you crazy? How do you get them out of there? There's all these questions that...
And all the answers to all those questions are the exact reasons why we love going there.
Exactly. It puts you on a separate playing field from most hunters, in that most people won't go there and try. And it definitely takes the experience of someone showing you how to do these things. I mean, I didn't come up with a lot of these things on my own, but basically what we did is we transferred... It's a Northeast style of hunting, in that we hunting in groups and we do drives and we shoot them with rifles. That's definitely a New York, Pennsylvania thing to do.
Right.
But then we brought in the Western aspect of hunting, where we're hunting with basically Western gear, hiking boots, backpacks, knives, game bags. We're bringing that style into what we're doing here, and that separates you from a lot of other people. And we're not the only ones doing it, but
the minority.
In large part, I mean, even when you're in Potter County and people see you backpack out a deer, they're looking at you cross-eyed a lot of times, like, what, you know, and they'll ask you, where'd you shoot that one? And you'll tell them, oh, over that ridge and down the other side and in the bottom, and they look at you like, we brought out a deer one day. It was just the four of us. It was me, Dad, Brian, and Tard. It's about 5 years ago. It was Saturday afternoon. It was the last day of the hunt. We didn't have a deer yet. It was like 55 degrees. We come up the mountain in t-shirts, and some other guys were trying to drive the same area that we had just hunted, so we were lucky we beat them to the punch. But they're all hunting up high, and they're like, and we told them we got a deer because we showed them the horns, and they're like, oh, that's a great buck, congratulations and stuff. And we said, yeah, we got him, 500 feet down below us or whatever in that creek bottom, and they're like, congratulations, good luck getting that out. And we told them, yeah, we already got him out. He's in our backpacks. And they just, they could not believe it.
Yeah.
But
well, this is not on our PA hunt, but first time I ever went to Letchworth with you guys, same tactics that you guys probably developed here in PA.
Yeah, exactly.
We take to Letchworth for a day each year and just have we've had incredible hunts. My experience down there in 4 years of doing it with you guys is just like, it's awesome. But that one, I shot that buck and doe on that first drive in Letchworth, and we're packing those deer out. There was 5 of us, and so we had both deer all quartered up, everything in our backpacks, and we walked past, it's a really popular hiking area, so there's these people hiking, and they're like, oh yeah, you guys hunting? And we're like, yeah, and like my buck's head is on my backpack.
They didn't even notice.
They didn't even notice it.
Yeah.
And like totally just wouldn't even think of it. But that's how we approach it now, and what a difference it makes. I mean, last year with the hunt we had, that was like, we were shooting, we shot 6 bucks in 3 days with 10 guys, and those deer, we were like, it was not slowing our drives down at all. Shoot a deer, Tard comes in there with his chainsaw. And he's got this huge Cutco knife, and he can have a deer quartered and in someone's game bags in like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So conservatively, 2 people can do it, but it's better with 3. If you have 2 guys skin and quarter, and 1 guy just holding game bags and loading up backpacks, I'd say 25 minutes is conservative. And we're just quartering, we're not deboning. Because we found we used to debone, and that takes a lot longer, and it actually makes more waste on the meat. And we realized quite a few years ago that we don't need to get the bone out of these whitetails because they're not that big.
Yeah.
So
it almost makes me. I think it makes them easier to carry too, because you've got a
big chunk of meat in a backpack as opposed to
a ball of meat.
And that I don't think makes a huge difference, but it's definitely the way to go.
Yeah.
You bring them home, and we're fortunate to have a cooler too when we get home where you can hang them up. And this time of year it probably doesn't matter, but
yeah.
And then so back to the history a little bit more was, like I had told you, I kept trying to grow the group because people were in and out, and you'd ask new people and they'd be like, oh yeah, I want to do that. And then when it really came down to it, they always seemed to find a reason why they couldn't go. There was this or that with the family, or didn't have time off from work. It's like, okay, in half the cases I'm thinking to myself, I know you basically you started thinking about it and got intimidated and said, I'm gonna stay around here and kind of do my own thing.
Yeah.
You were one of the first new guys of this new group to jump in head first, and just, definitely the first time we talked to you about it, you're like, yeah, I'm in, I'm going. I'll drive my truck.
Yeah.
And that was probably only a year after we did that first Letchworth trip.
No, it was the same year.
Really?
Yeah. Because we went to PA, and then it was like the next weekend we went to Letchworth.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the other big thing that that made a huge difference was GPS and topo maps. You know, we used to carry around topo maps, USGS maps of the whole huge area, you know, Potter County or whatever. So you know, you'd be looking at this square here would be the entire size of the area that we hunted. Right. So
the detail was not there.
You could barely. It would give you enough direction to see how many big ridges there were and which direction the road was, so that you could put a compass on and be like, okay, here's where I think I am, and here's the direction I need to go. You know, which basically it's up or down there. Yeah. So it's not a big deal, but there's so many ridges and they're all running in different directions that you're not going to get lost ultimately, because up is home, but you'll come out miles from where you think you're gonna if you don't actually know where you're at.
Yeah.
So after hunting there like 4 or 5 times, I was on a western trip with my buddy Kurt, and he had a topo map printed of the area we were hunting.
Yeah, why don't you say where you're getting these too, because these maps are awesome.
Yeah, so, and these are less important than they used to be because of all the technology we have before, but these are great for planning and doing what we're doing now. Mm-hmm. And we use these for every hunt we do. We get a map out in the back of the truck and we look and we say, we can point on a large scale detailed topo map and tell everybody exactly what we're doing mm-hmm. and where they're going, and that way everybody understands what we're trying to do and actually works together and actually usually ends up in the right spot at the right time and is able to coordinate a hunt. But I know this isn't the only one that does this, but the service that I use is mytopo.com. You create an account so you can save your maps and everything, and basically what you do is you just zoom in on maps and center the area that you want, and then have a custom map printed. You can print it to the scale you want. You can get a bigger or smaller area. You can customize it any way you want to. And it's basically the maps that I've been getting are $20. So it ends up like to your door shipping and everything is like $22. You can get bigger, you can have them laminated, waterproof, things like that. I mean, you can get really extreme with it. But when I first got one of these maps, I brought it to Dad's house on the weekend one day during hunting season. I'm like, check this out. And we're looking at stuff that we've been hunting for years, and we're like, oh my God, that's what we've been doing and where we've been hunting. I mean, it's amazing now to think that we didn't have that. But,
I know, I can't imagine.
But you just didn't have access to all the stuff that you do now, and you look at it.
To your point, none of the ridges are running north and south.
No.
Everything is turning, bending. You got this finger ridge that comes into this one, and then it drops in, and it's overwhelming. I can't even fathom if you were.
Yeah. And I think it was.
What's up, Emma? You're not here. We'll pretend you're not here.
All right. We'll talk later.
Yeah.
So then it was about the same time that I got my first Garmin E-Trex, where you could download the topo maps onto. So then, not only knowing what the landscape looked like, but then to take it and have a GPS that showed you where you were at on a topo map, that was just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And that was only 10 years ago or so, 9-10 years ago, that we just opened up a whole new world of the way we can do these trips now and these hunts. Because it used to be like you'd get out of a truck and, you know, everybody be pointing and be like, oh, you got to go this here and there. And, you know, we'd try to coordinate hunts a little bit.
And everybody has a different understanding of what that ridge is or what this.
You get 10 feet from the truck in Pennsylvania and everything looks totally different than it did
yeah.
when you were standing there.
Right.
And we'd have some half-assed two-way radios. That was the only way you could maybe contact each other, because you got little to no cell phone contact, and it was just a huge cluster. And that's why we used to just hunt in pairs, because you could kind of just be like, you pick a ridge and hunt down the side of a ridge, one guy 100 feet above the other in elevation or whatever, and,
mm-hmm.
and just try to bump deer around that way. But so we've gone from 4 to 6 guys wandering around in the forest trying to hopefully run into a deer, to now having, I think we're going to have last 2 years we had around, well, last year I guess we had about 10 guys.
Yeah.
And now I think we're going to have like 14 this year, where we'll all be, and most of them I think we'll have 3 or 4 new guys, but most everyone is experienced in this area as well. Everybody's been here at least twice and done this kind of hunting with us. So now we know the areas that we like to hunt and that we've seen deer, in particular good bucks, in certain areas before. We know how to set up on them. We're still far from experts at it, but we can take a group of people and coordinate the efforts and actually have results on pretty much every hunt. We at least see deer and see horns on pretty much every hunt that we do now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still so big and hard to hunt that deer end up circling you, and you end up getting back in there and doing the same things over and over. Last year was amazing. We hunted this one area 3 or 4 different times, and because bucks kept getting around us in there, so we're like, oh, let's go back after them again, and they'd be in there every time.
Yeah, it was insane and whether there was a hot doe in the area or what was going on, but I mean, when we found them, my God, did we find them last year? They were heavy in some of those areas. It was awesome. So this year, I think having the extra bodies, we'll be able to hopefully plan for some of those. We've been talking about it for years, trying to put somebody 200 yards behind us, behind the pushers,
yeah,
and having them kind of shadow the drive on, because we like to typically get down in some of these creek bottoms and drive it up to the head of the creek, wherever the creek is starting.
Yeah.
And being able to have a guy or two behind each one of the pushers, could really be a deadly.
Yeah. I've had some thought of that strategy for a few years now, but you never had enough guys, and you always think, oh, I got to have sitters up on top and at the end, because if you push them, because if they do run the way you want them to, you got to have sitters, because it's just dumb, because they're sitting ducks. If they actually run up through the way you want them to, you got to have guys up there trying to, and you still can't cover all of that or anywhere near it, but look at the map, pick likely spots where you think the deer might run out through.
Saddles, or, you got really sharp ledges that they have to almost go around. You kind of can game plan to that point, but
a lot of it too is the vegetation on the top, because of they clear cut all the tops, the ridges where the roads are. And so a lot of them are so thick or just totally down where there's no cover, because it's a recent clear cut, where you kind of figure it's probably not going to come through there. So you can kind of pick a hardwood area where it'd be easy for deer to run.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't get a lot of deer that way, but like I said, when they do come up through there, they're dead.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, that last drive last year, I mean, those deer read the script, except for the giant that doubled back on the whole, which that's what typically is. Those deer that double back are either mature does, mature bucks that have seen this trick before, and they either let you walk right by them and then they slip out, or they casually, like that giant did last year, and of course Brian had filled his tag and he's just walking with no gun, and that deer just walks just right by him.
So I've been talking for a while, so that's a great story, and there's a lot of lessons learned on that hunt, the last hunt that we did last year. I mean, tell that story a little bit more in depth of what we did there.
How we approached that?
How we approached it, and why we had 4 guys or 3 guys that didn't have guns in their hands.
Yeah, because those guys all filled their tags.
Yeah.
So we put those, obviously those guys are pushers, but it was right down in here, I think, if we're looking on the map.
Yep.
So I had a doe tag, and AJ hadn't shot anything yet, so he was across from me. He was one of the pushers.
He was walking on the bottom, so he was...
Yeah, he was on the very bottom, that's right.
So we had him in a spot where he was kind of lagging behind us a little bit, more as a shooter, because of it's open down there and there's not really deer bedding down there, so you kind of want a shooter down on those creek bottoms.
Right, because when you're in the bottom, I mean, once you get below, there's spots of thick areas, but for the most part, once you get down, it is very open hardwoods that you can see and you can shoot. And like the buck that I shot last year, it was on the first drive, and I was one of the pushers, and I shot that deer at almost 200 yards in the hardwoods.
Yeah.
Because I saw him moving, I saw his horn, he had 3 legal points on that side, and I took the shot and ended up getting him. But that's the thing, you get down in those bottoms, it's so open that if you catch one moving, you absolutely with a rifle can make that shot. But so on that drive, on the side I was on the left side of that creek as we were working up it, and so I was all the way on the bottom and maybe 150 yards up off the creek, and then Brian was above me and Tard was all the way at the top of that ridge, and we were just following that whole thing together. And we're using it, I think you might have touched on, we're using Garmin rhinos. So the beauty, I mean, those things are a game changer too, because as you're doing one of these still hunts, or drives, whatever you want to call it, you can see everybody in your hunting party on the map. So as you're moving, you're hitting you're updating yourself on the radio, and you can all stay in line, and everybody can be as safe as we can as we're doing these maneuvers. And so I had dropped over that ridge and working my way to the bottom, and almost immediately there was good snow on the ground, and almost immediately there had been no foot tracks, because you had to walk that road all the way in there. And as soon as I dropped over and I start dropping in, like, there's just sign everywhere. Like, it was tore up. They were eating acorns, browsing on everything. And I'm like, at some point here, we're going to run into some deer, and there's going to be a lot of them in here.
Yeah, and in the meantime, I was on the other side and walking down that old logging road, and I had Chris, AJ, and Brad with me. And 2 different points near the top, we saw a giant buck track going down into... We figured there was at least 2 shooters down in. They were from the night before, fresh in the snow, going out of the feed and into the bedding down in where we were going to hunt. So we were all looking at each other like, oh man, we might. So, and you were thinking the same thing on the other side. So we knew we might be walking into a jackpot there, and we really did.
Oh yeah. So I wasn't far into getting to my point, my elevation where I was going to stick at, and just starting to hunt along, and I was following a deer trail, and I look up ahead of me, and I spotted a buck bedded in some kind of thick, like, grapevines underneath a hemlock-ish, just dark area he's bedded in. So I spot this buck, and I come over to the radio, and I'm like, AJ, and he's below me. I can see him. He's right below me. I'm like, there's a buck right here. I'm like, I'm going to keep moving. He's going to get up. I'm like,
be ready.
Be ready. Like, perfect opportunity. And I don't know what happened, but the deer did exactly what we wanted him to. He got up and he went running straight. So AJ had a perfect opportunity, at least from my perspective. He had an opportunity at him. I don't know if perfect is that, but he had an opportunity at him.
Yeah.
Deer takes off running into the drive, so going where we want him to. AJ doesn't get a shot at him, and then the deer starts to cut up the hill. So I come over the radio, and I'm yelling to Tard and Brian. I'm like, guys, there's a buck coming up the hill. Don't let him get past you. Don't let him get past you. So all of a sudden, you hear Brian and Tard just screaming and hollering and yelling, because they don't have guns. They can't shoot it. So they're just yelling at this deer. And so then, it wasn't even 5 minutes later. 5 minutes later, we'll just say, you hear boom. And I don't know if Brad shot. I think he just shot once or twice. I can't remember.
He only shot once, but I didn't hear. The crazy thing about hunting in these mountains is, you hear some shots that feel like they're right on top of you, and you know they're one of your buddies, and then you'll end up finding out that everybody's like, no, I didn't shoot, And then other times you don't even hear a shot, and it's the guy was 300 yards from me, like
just
Brad
right around
was.
the point or whatever. Yeah, because you might have been right over in here.
Yeah, I probably was in that area, because I remember I was really, when I heard the chatter on the radio, I was just really hoping that AJ was going to get a shot at that buck. And at the same time, I was hoping he didn't come up my side, because I was in the same situation where I would have just been waving at the deer.
Right.
I didn't have a gun either, so.
But that buck ran the whole bottom, and then he popped out. So, like, there's almost like a kind of like a turkey foot at the end of a lot of these creek bottoms, where they kind of go up into these 3 little bowls. And Brad was sitting there waiting for him, and the buck came right to him, and he shot a nice, beautiful 8-point.
Yeah.
And then so we kept the drive going, and Brian and Tard are above me still yet. And a few more deer were bumping around, but I think I had gotten a lot of those deers up and moving from that first one I jumped. So I didn't see any more deer on that whole drive, but there was shooting, banging. So I think John missed a buck.
Yeah.
And then another buck got up and went running to Danny, and Danny shot that deer. And I think Danny had missed a buck earlier in the hunt. Not this day, not this drive, but early on in the hunt. So, like, super happy for him. He got that buck, and then all of a sudden you just hear Brian and Tard just screaming, and I'm like, what in the hell is going on? And after that buck squirted out that Danny shot, all of a sudden this just giant just comes like slinking right up out of this ravine. I think it was right in this little ravine right here, and just comes slinking up out of there.
Danny was sitting here, so it had to be back just a little bit at least.
And I guess this buck, I mean, Brian, it's hard to get Brian excited about the size of a buck. And he comes over the radio, and he's just yelling and screaming. He's like, hey, this deer is fucking huge. And he said it was it was a giant. Did he have double drops or did he have kickers? I can't remember.
Yeah, I
but
think
he said
kickers.
it was just a giant mainframe, like 10.
Yeah.
And it had kickers coming off the G2s, and he was all fired up. So that buck, it's amazing how that deer, it never ran. It just walked right between him and Tard.
Yeah.
Tard never saw because he was over the ledge, but that deer just walked and just doubled right back on the drive.
Yeah.
You know, Brian tried running back, trying to scare him. I mean, deer
Yeah.
just kept going, and was not phased at all.
Yeah.
By that whole drive.
And if it hadn't been the last afternoon of the last day of the hunt, I'm sure we would have. I mean, the snow was old and crunchy, and it was hard to tell what was fresh and what wasn't. But we certainly would have been trying to. We would have spent the rest of our day going after that deer, but we really just couldn't, obviously.
Yeah.
But by far and away the biggest deer we've ever seen there. 10 years ago, I mean, me and Dad used to be like, man, there's got to be mature bucks in here because the hunting pressure seems low. There's not many people that live around here that really hunt around here. It's so big and vast, and we can't even get to a lot of this stuff. I mean, some of this stuff you'd have to walk for days to get to, even. And then you got the tops that are, so thick you can't even walk through them. It's like if a buck wanted to live 10 years there, he could. Yeah. So we've always known that these kind of bucks probably existed. In theory, but I've had some cameras out the last few years too, where I've got some really good bucks, mature bucks on there, but never anything like the one that Brian saw.
But like to your point, we know. I mean, so the first year I was there, we didn't really get into anything that was real crazy as far as seeing big bucks. But then the last 3 years, we have had encounters with great bucks every time. And so for in a 3-day hunt, when you're running down there without doing any pre-scouting, to go into that, and yes, we're moving deer around, but a lot of these bucks, they're just doing what bucks do, and we're just getting on them where they are. And so for 3 years in a row, for us to walk away from those hunts with, last year we shot some great bucks, and we saw some great bucks that we didn't get on the ground.
Yeah.
And then the prior 2 years, same thing. And so like this area, I think it's just going to continue getting better and better with the antler point restrictions and with how thick the cover is and the logging operation. Just there's so much food for them. And yes, there is hunting pressure, but there's so much area for them to just go and get away from that when they want to. And like we're going next weekend, which is, I mean, it's late. Like it's going to be middle of December.
Yeah, December 14th will be next Saturday, the last day of the hunt, which is the last day of their season.
Yeah.
So you hit on, so you mentioned how that deer got up and just walked back through the drive, and that's why we're going to have this year, with the amount of people that we have, there's going to be at least, if we're doing this style of hunt where we're hunting up through a ravine, a gully, we're going to have at least one guy on each side, probably a couple, 200 to 300 yards back, that's just going to follow the drive up through. And he's not really trying to push deer. He's a shooter. He's going to try to kill a big buck that doubles back on us because they do it all the time. And I'm thinking 200 to 300 yards for a couple of reasons. One, safety. You don't want to be shooting up towards the other hunters, and there's not too much to worry about in that, because it sounds like a lot of guys like, geez, you guys got to be careful and things like that. Like, there's so much vegetation and terrain that it's hard. I mean, if you tried to shoot somebody, you'd have a hard time doing it. So,
but there's also a part of that. I mean, we all trust each other. Like everybody, you don't just invite just random people on these hunts because you invite somebody in. Like that's why for me, a lot of people are like, well, it's a public land hunt, Billy. You could just go when you want. But it's like, no, I feel like as that I need to be invited to go on this because it's not like you need to be trusted by the people that you're going with. Yeah. Vice versa. Like if there was people on that trip that I didn't want to be anywhere near. Yeah. It's like it would make it a little bit uncomfortable hunting this style. But
yeah, I mean, we really don't have any of those kind of friends.
No, we kind of weed them out. Yeah.
So, and then the other reason as far as doubling back would be we'll put a guy somewhat high, but that way if he runs up or down, we can sort of give him a heads up and have him try to get to where he needs to be to cut him off. So, that's a new thing that I'm really looking forward to this year. Yeah. And it'll be strength in numbers. It'll be fun. It should be successful. A lot of it does depend on the weather. I think it depends less now because of numbers of hunters, where we can kind of surround an area a little bit. But man, when we have snow, we had some snow last year, it just makes it so much better, so much easier in so many ways to hunt those deer, to be able to track them, You can see them better when they're running through.
Especially if you're getting some fresh snow like each day, because it really shows you that fresh sign.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've got snow and then I'll take it either way.
Yeah.
But if you can judge, is this sign from today or is it from 2 days ago?
Yeah, last year the third day we hadn't had any snow since really the first morning. So everything was crunchy and it was old. So there was, by the time we, especially in this area that we kept hunting, there was tracks everywhere.
Yeah.
And by the third day, it's like, I don't even know what's fresh anymore,
Right.
But, the year before we didn't get any snow and we had a good hunt. We had tons of encounters, but nobody got anything. It was a weird time because we missed a bunch of deer. We missed a couple that we shouldn't have got, and then others were like, well, I understand how that deer got away. But what happened, though, too, is a guy takes a shot and doesn't know if he hits him. And in this terrain, it's hard to tell where you shot, where the animal was. So you end up like waiting back for the group to catch up, and then, the guy saying, well, he was over there. And now you got 6 guys wandering around looking for tracks, looking for blood, looking for a sign of a hit or a miss. And you want to be diligent about it and be ethical about it and make sure that, you pulled the trigger on a deer. You got to spend, sometimes we spend, probably by the time people get over there to help and then you spend the time looking, you might waste an hour or more of just looking around in dry leaves for any sign of a hit or a miss.
Right.
And the thing is, usually when we get a deer, we just drop them right on the spot, so it's not that difficult. But when you miss, you got to make sure you missed.
Yeah.
And so the year before was a little bit of a cluster in that regard, in that we just was like, there were times like when Tard shot at that deer, and Tard doesn't miss.
Yeah.
And it was an easy shot at a big buck, and he just was, it was like he saw a ghost when we got there. He could not believe that deer didn't just, the deer should have just dropped. The guy shoots several deer per year, especially with a rifle. And then it turns out that we spent all that time looking because we're like, there's no way he missed, but at the same time, that deer should have just dropped right on the spot. So after the trip, he gets home and shoots his gun and finds out that his mounts were loose or something. And
Dude,
so
that happens a lot.
So he got home and shot at the target, and I think 2 shots were right on and one was just like up in space, and he's like, what is going on here? And finds out that his scope mounts were loose or something. So
it's insane. That happens more often. Check your damn scope mounts, people, because it's happened to a couple guys this year at our camp, and everything's good, and then you go hiking for the day, or it's sitting on the 4-wheeler racks when you're driving around, that shit vibrates.
Yeah, it's bouncing around in the back of the truck and on forestry roads in Pennsylvania. That'll happen.
Yes, you should check your stuff for sure. So we kind of hit on, so we wanted to touch on the group size, we wanted to touch on this, drive strategy, hunt history. We kind of talked a little bit about what we've learned over the, what you guys have learned over the years, and what we've, especially in the last 3-4 years that I've been there, I feel like every year we've made some improvements as to how we're approaching certain areas, where we're putting sitters based on what we've seen them do in prior years. So I feel like each year we're just, and even sometimes even during the hunt, we're like adjusting to what we're seeing the deer doing, and how they're escaping or where they're just hanging and feeding. We're always adjusting. I feel like I think that's one of the funnest parts about this hunt and this style of hunts, is that it's nonstop just adjustments.
It's a lot of strategy to it.
Yeah. And I love taking pictures of the groups sitting on the tailgate with the map out, because like that to me is just, I don't know, I just love it.
That really is my favorite part of the trip, is the strategy and the camaraderie, and lunchtime's always a good time. It's like we do one big hunt in the morning, we come back, we're kind of eating lunch, we're kind of setting up for the next drive, but there's always a topo map out in the back of a pickup bed, and 4 guys standing around it making up the plan for the afternoon, and then executing the plan and hopefully having success with it. That's really, that's by far the strategy is pretty much my favorite part.
Yeah, absolutely. And once you've gotten through, we move a lot here during gun as far as still hunting and stuff like that, especially if we have snow on the ground, speaking locally.
Yeah.
But God, you get through archery season, it's like I just want to get on my feet and walk and go find deer, because it's a long drag when you're sitting in a stand morning and night and even doing some all-day sits.
Yeah.
You're ready to get up and move for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned before, you said still hunting, drives or something like that, and there's a big difference between those two.
Yeah.
if you get the right conditions, you can still hunt around an area kind of anywhere and maybe have success. But what we're doing is usually that kind of hunting in this, unless you have some fresh snow or rain or something that makes it so that you can move around quietly in this terrain, there's no point in trying to be careful about it. Just go in there, set up, and try to get the deer running. If it's crunchy so they can hear you a mile away, that's fine.
Right.
Let them get up and run, and hopefully they'll run to one of your.
But it's funny because I approach when I'm a walker on a drive. You know, I approach that a lot of times. You know, if you say to somebody you're walking, they're like, "Oh, I'm not gonna have any opportunity." It's like when I'm a walker on a drive, like I feel like I have the best opportunity out of everybody because you're in the action. Regardless of what ends up popping out at the end of that drive to the sitters, you know, you're going to have opportunity. So I'm always kind of, you know, maybe I walk a little too slow, or I'm a little bit too careful with what I'm doing when I could just be covering ground. But I'm always trying to hunt while I'm a pusher.
That's an important distinction too, because you are doing that. And honestly, we kill more deer by the walk. The people walking end up killing more deer than the sitters. Mm-hmm. It's almost a little bad to be a sitter sometimes, because you sit there for 2 to 3 hours, you're freezing, and all the other guys are seeing deer running all over the place. But you got to have those guys. You cannot go and hunt an area like that without people sitting up on the sides and the top of the hunt. Because you never know what you're missing.
Right.
Part of it is just the sightings. What you're gonna see. You need to have sort of spotters up there.
Is that a problem? No, Sarah's getting Billy. It's all right. Don't worry about it. I appreciate it. She's on the ball this time. Last time I almost lost my child.
I'm not gonna be in the podcast. Why not? She was, Mom, they're talking about apps.
Oh, that's funny. We'll get to her deer stories on the next episode, and that's what we'll do.
So, and the thing too is that if you're walking, you do have to cover ground, because you can't be like all day on one little hunt, but at the same time you can only go so fast, especially when you're carrying a rifle and a backpack. And I mean, this terrain is extreme. I mean, as far as because you're side hilling most of the time, you do a lot of straight up and straight down, getting set up for hunts, and then coming out at the end. But you're side hilling the whole time, and you just can only go so fast when you're doing that kind of thing. So what I do is I scoot for like 10 to 20 yards, and then I stop and I look, and then I move again. And I've almost all the deer I've killed in Pennsylvania have been while I was walking a side hill, and when I just happened to stop. It was the same thing last year. I stopped in the middle of all this beach brush, but I had a little lane where I could kind of see a little bit, and I stopped, and all of a sudden a freaking herd of deer comes through that you may have gotten move in the beginning there. And
did Tard see any of those deer? Because he was below you.
No, well, he was on the other side.
He was on the other side.
Yeah, so he was across from me.
And he was on the complete other side of that.
Yeah, we covered a big area, so we only had one guy on every side hill in that drive, which is a little different than we usually do it. But I wanted to cover a big area, because a lot of that we don't hunt very often.
You shot that right in here, right?
Yes, up here on this, farther up here. There's a little draw that comes up through that doesn't really show up too good right here.
No, because I shot my buck right here. Over in here is where he died, and then I think I came up this is the finger I was coming up and bumped all those deer down to you. Or no, maybe it was this finger right here.
Oh, I'm looking at the map backwards. We came through here, so you were in this way.
Yeah, okay.
And I was over.
You were on this side hill.
Make sure when you're reading a topo map you're not upside down. But I was on this side hill.
That's how accidents happen.
This side hill here. And what happens is you kick deer off of these points and these sides, and they run around, and we have shooters up here in case they come up and out. But a lot of times they just wrap around these bulls and go back, and then there's another guy coming up from this way, and that's where you crush them too. Yeah. That's the way I've shot most of my deer.
So a little strategy there. So I think the big thing that I think is unique to these hunts, and I think after everyone's first time going, they realize that gear-wise, you need to approach this a little bit differently than what you do when you're here hunting on flatland in a tree stand. And I know I made the mistake my first maybe year or two, but so I guess what I wanted to kind of talk about, but also pick your brain on, is over the years, I would assume that everybody's gear has kind of evolved as far as what you're wearing for boots, what you're wearing for all your clothing system, because the challenge with this type of hunting is that you're moving. So if you're moving, you're warm, but then the second you sit down, it's usually cold, and sometimes colder than hell.
Yeah.
And how do you stay warm for sometimes 2-3 hours when you're waiting for this drive to come?
Yeah.
So we've kind of, over the last couple of years, we've come up, everybody's kind of changed their gear setup a little bit to handle that type of diversity. But like, what have you, because you can speak to when you guys first started, I mean, what were you guys wearing? Were you wearing like layering? Were you layering? Were you wearing big bulky stuff that we'd wear around here when you're sitting in a tree stand?
No, I don't think I ever had too much problem with gear myself. I mean, I've changed it a lot, but the big thing is to do layers in a good pair of boots that you can walk in. And feet is probably the, you know, to me, I always have problems getting the, you know, the right setup for my feet. But in particular,
you sweat a lot.
Yeah.
Sir sweats a lot.
I sweat a lot in general, but especially my feet. I mean, when I drive down there next week, 2.5 hour drive, when I get there, I'm going to change my socks. So I have that problem to begin with, but as far as hiking and that, as long as I'm moving, I'm fine. But yeah, a lot of the challenge. So you got to have a good pair of boots. To me, it's more important that your boots are good for walking and hiking up and down and across than they are about how warm they are. Because as long as you're kind of moving, you're fine. The sitting really is the tough part, and you have to rotate sitters because it's just, you can only, you know, you sit for one long hunt and you're like, okay, I need to get out and move.
Yeah.
And even though the sitters, a lot of times they got to walk a mile or two before they sit, you know, and that's something to, you know, basically we do 2 big hunts a day, and we might fit in some other stuff, or we might try to combine 2 into 1, but it takes a good hour usually to set up by the time you get everybody in position and start to hunt. So it's gear-wise, you have to be set up 2 different ways. You have to be ready to sit or to walk. And a lot of times you can come out to the truck in between and adjust your setup, but you know, it helps. We all hunt with backpacks, so you can always have gear in there. And the big thing I've learned is not to get overheated when you're walking. Stop, take off a layer, even if it takes you 5 minutes to take all your gear off, to remove a, you know, either a jacket or an underlayer or something like that, because as soon as you get hot, it's miserable.
Yeah. Well, and then when you stop, you're instantly, any of that sweat's going to turn to cold. And that's, I was texting with Brad the other day, and you know, the first year he went, you know, we called that one hill Brad's Hill, because he had to go up and down it like 3-4 times, and that is one of the longest damn hills I have ever walked up in my life. It just never ends. And he was sweating and mother effing the whole time up and down that. But I told him, you know, to me, what I've learned, and I learned a lot of this from our couple trips out west, and how to pack and prepare clothing. Yep, exactly. Is layering up instead of layering down. Where I kind of feel like I've gotten my clothing system pretty tuned in to where I can wear the same pants I wear a base layer and 1 pair of pants and a base layer and 1 top, and then I just layer up if I need to.
Yeah.
So I can literally move around all day and be comfortable. And if I'm going to be a sitter, I get to my spot and I just put on I got a puffy jacket. I now have a puffy pair of pants, and those boot blankets, those Arctic Shield boot blankets.
Yeah.
Those have been a game changer for me, or even around here, because I'll just wear my hiking boots, and then I get to a spot where I'm going to sit, and I just pull those out of my backpack. They take up like no space, and throw those on, and I'm comfortable.
Yeah.
So I know that's how I'm approaching it now. Whereas 4 years ago, all I had was heavy bibs and jackets, because I wasn't used to doing that sort of stuff, and wearing my insulated hunting boots, which are okay. But the problem is, as soon as your feet get wet with that insulation, you're done. So wearing like an uninsulated hiking boot, you're almost better off doing that and having something you can either throw on over the top of it, or, you know, take a little blanket with you or something to keep your feet warm if you really have issues with that. But once your feet are wet, you're freaking screwed.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I'm always going to have at least 1 pair of boots and socks in the truck, and I might even put a pair of socks in my backpack and change midday, you know, because a lot of times what will happen is I'll hunt the morning Last year I never sat once because I killed my deer the first day.
Yeah,
and then
same for me. Yeah, we walked the whole damn
me
time.
and you never sat once, so it was a little easier to prepare for gear because you just knew what you were going to be doing all day, every day.
It's pretty easy to walk the hangovers off every morning too.
Yeah,
I never really felt bad.
especially Friday morning. I definitely had to walk one off on Friday morning.
Yeah.
But
That's a story for another day.
yeah, well, we could tell stories all night, I'm sure. But,
Oh yeah.
well, by the way, our trip to Pennsylvania every year is brought to you by Busch Beer. So
And Ying Yings.
yeah, we've been talking seriously all day here, but we do have a lot of fun. We pretty much saved that for the ride home and the time in the cabin. And that's another thing too. The cabin has been a game changer too. You know, we
Yeah.
used to stay in a hotel every year, and that was pretty nice. I mean, it's very convenient in some ways, but you know, you haul all your gear in there, and then you know, one of the things was they'd have breakfast for you, but that was not
No, it
nothing
was
to
your
write
typical
home about
motel
either.
breakfast.
Yeah, so this will be our third year staying in a cabin it's big enough to hold. Well, we're gonna try to put 14 people in there this year, but it's, what is it, like 3 or 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms?
It's 4 bedrooms. No, 3 bedrooms.
It might only be 3, but one of them's huge, and then it's got that bonus area on the back where you can put down like cots and
And
sleeping bags.
Danny usually smells so bad we just let him be in that open air space where he can fart and do whatever he needs to do because he's got the bush farts with whatever freaking summer sausage he's been eating all day. And that's it's like the best part. And we get into that cabin and it's just like last year we had 10 guys, which is more than we had the year before, the first year in that cabin. And it was just a freaking yard sale in there.
Yeah.
And then we kept it pretty clean. I was amazed when we left. The place didn't look like anybody even been there, but
it's really just our gear that's everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, we're actually take pretty good care of the place. Other than, I mean, you come in at the end of the day and you want to get all your gear laid out and dried out, and especially me. I mean, like me and Danny, nobody wants to. We probably should just share a room.
You should share a room
so that we don't have to, so that no one else has to deal with us.
It could be a damn Febreze commercial in there.
But hunt hard, play hard.
Absolutely.
It's pretty much the moral of the story, and that's what makes it so much fun. Is because you're having a blast with your buddies. It's like at night. It's a typical hunting camp. You know, it's a camp atmosphere. We're just having a ball. We're cooking. We're eating great. We're drinking our asses off. We're like your typical weekend hunting camp that you might go to in the Adirondacks or wherever, where you might walk in there at night and think these guys are jokers. They're not, they're just on vacation to get away from their jobs and their lives for 3 days, and they're not really doing any serious hunting. But that is not the case at all.
Alarm goes off at 5:30 and we're all getting up and making coffee and getting ready to hit the road so we can get up in the hunting area.
Yeah, we're giving her hell, and we're putting in our best effort every day, and we're getting results, varying results. But we definitely separate the two, where we hunt hard and we have a lot of fun too. And just the hunting is a lot of fun too. But by the time you get done at night, you're whooped, and you just want to just go and have some fun.
Tear it up.
Yeah.
And that's because this will air after the podcast we did on Thanksgiving night with my family up at camp. And it's so funny because some of the stories are like, oh my God, like people are going to think all we do is we're just just crazy drinkers. And it's like, I mean, I can say times have changed because a lot of the stuff we're not going somewhere to do this stuff. We go to wherever we're going to be and we stay and we have a good time there.
Yeah.
Whereas you listen to stories from the past, it's like they're just doing just dangerous, stupid shit. Whereas now it's like we're all in one place, we're all hanging out, we're having a damn good time, but there's nobody getting hurt, But I listen to those stories and I just think about it, it's like that's a hunting camp. Like, do you look at this stuff 1 year, 10 years, 5 years, 20, whatever, and it's like those are the stories I grew up hearing and the stories that I can't wait to tell my son Billy about the big one when he's 18 years old. I can tell him that story because it's a classic story.
I don't know if he ever wants to hear that
story.
story.
He'll hear that story. Uncle Dallas and Uncle Brian. Yep. Uncle Tard, that's what happened. But like that's growing up as a kid, and I'm sure it was the same for you, like hearing those stories from our fathers or our grandfathers or your uncles, whatever, like that I could not wait to be part of those stories.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing with this trip, is that every year we come away with something funny happens that just sticks with you. And a lot of times has nothing to do with that deer we shot.
Right.
It's got something to do with what happened at camp or the trip down or something we saw. That's the stuff that we're all fully engaged in wanting to have. You don't know what it's going to be, but something's going to happen.
Yeah. To this day, I'm still looking back at archived pictures from 3-4 years ago of our trip. And, I mean, you're like our group photographer. I mean, you do a good job of getting a lot of stuff and, you know, posting it where we can all kind of go back and look at it. But I still do. I go back and look, and it's like, I remember every one of those days, and I remember how much fun it was. And by looking back at some pictures from 3-4 years ago, I can just.
So I think it was 3 years ago was the first year Pete went with us, and Pete's never done anything like this before. And he came, and we were staying in the hotel at that point. I think it was maybe it might have been the third day, but it was not the first day. And I dropped you and him off down at the bottom of one of these big creek bottoms.
Yeah.
And like right off private property, I dropped you off, and you're like, it's going to be quite the hike, Pete. You might not want to dress too heavy. He's wearing down bibs, and he's got his insulated hunting boots on, and that's like a 4-mile hike.
Yeah.
And it's uphill the whole damn way. Once you're climbing, you're in the bottom, and then you're just climbing up.
It was more than I bargained for, but it was bad because we had Pete with us, and everybody who knows Pete can definitely appreciate this story. But the night before, we told him more than once, you're going to go on a long, I don't know why we decided that he was the guy for this. I'm not sure why. But
why you and I
think
didn't
he
go,
said he
Brian?
wanted to walk or something like that, Well, plus I needed someone to drop us off that knew how to read a map and drive all the way back up around there, and I wasn't necessarily confident that he was going to be able to do that. But we should have just sent him up top to sit.
Yeah.
I don't know why he ended up, and it ended up being a worse walk than I thought it was going to be, but me and you would have just crushed it and not complained about it. But we told him, you're going to have to go on a long walk in the morning, dress light, this and that. So we get like 3 miles in to him just sweating like crazy. And every time I stop, I'd have to keep stopping to wait for him to catch up with me, and I'd be drinking water. And every time I look back, and I noticed he wasn't drinking water. So finally, after like an hour of this, I go, Pete, did you bring any water? He goes, no, your dad told me I was going to be sitting this morning. I go, Pete, he did not tell you that. We told you specifically that's not what you were going to be doing.
Yeah.
So
Peter had too many Coors Lights the night before.
Fortunately, I had an extra bottle of water I gave him, and it's, thank you, Dallas.
Dallas.
So by the end of where we were starting to, he kept asking me, are we almost there? Are we almost there? And then I thought we were almost there, and I was like, no, we got to go around one more bend, around one more ridge. This is like another 10-minute walk. I think he was actually mad at me, and I felt bad because it was partially my fault that it was more than I bargained for.
Yeah.
And I felt bad for the sitters up top because they kept updating me and wanting to know where I was, and I'm like, I'm coming. So fortunately, at the end of the road, John had a dead buck, so all was forgiven. Everybody was happy. The sitters were like, no, it wasn't too long. It was fine. It worked out great. And my idea was I wanted to come in with a different access to try to be a little more, kind of sneak up on him a little better.
Right.
And John killed a deer.
Yeah, it worked. I mean,
Pete was happy. Everybody was happy at the end of it.
Yeah.
So it did work out, but it was a lesson learned. And I do get us into trouble once in a while because I come up with these ideas. Some of my ideas are good. Some of them are not good.
Not every idea is going to be good, Dallas. You got to roll the dice sometimes.
Right.
That's the story of my life.
Yeah.
It's just, it is what
you
it
learn
is.
from it.
You do. I would say one other thing for anybody that's going to go with a group that hopefully listens to this before we go is boot dryer. That's a damn necessity.
Yeah, I can't.
I never had one until I went with you guys the first year, and you're like, oh, everybody's got boot dryers. I'm like,
what's that?
What's that? I never had one. I put it by the fire.
Yeah.
So like that is a game changer to keep those dry your boots overnight, because your boots, once they're wet, they're not drying out overnight.
Even when you bring them in a warm house, even if you put them by a fire, you put them on the next morning and they're still a little damp. That's like, oh man, I'm off to a bad start now.
Yeah. So it should be good. I think we hit all the things I wanted to. Very impressive. An hour. We stayed right on track. I think we got everything pretty well wrapped.
Yeah,
so
the next step is hopefully to have a bunch of success and a lot of fun. Of course, we'll have fun either way.
Yeah.
But hopefully we can get together and tell some stories about the trip.
Yeah.
Down the road.
I'm going to have the gear with, so we'll see how things play out. Maybe we'll do a little recap on the way back to the cabin each night or something, and so we can put that out afterwards. And that might be kind of fun to have a like a day-by-day recap. And I think it might be challenging to do it, and I don't know. So and then necessarily I want to do one at camp because I don't want to pull people away or change that camp atmosphere, because the best part is just sitting around and shooting the shit and having fun. So yeah, we'll probably do a little day-by-day action, and then probably do a recap, hopefully with 6, 8, 10 buck stories, which might be like a 6-hour podcast. But
we now know that it's possible.
It is possible.
We always thought it was, but every trip down here in the past, we've averaged 1 buck per. We've had a couple 2s and we've had 1 or 2 0s, so basically we've always averaged 1, and with a smaller group too. I mean, me and Dad killed one, just the 2 of us one time, on the first day. Yeah, it can happen, but it's pretty tough to pile them up the way we did last year. Yeah. So
if we can do that again, we're on to something. We definitely figured it out.
Yeah, and 6 of them last year we had. Danny's buck was probably a yearling. Brian was maybe a 2-year-old, but then the rest of them were older than
mine
that.
Was all broken up, and his horns fell off.
I think that might have been a 3-year-old.
I think it was a 3-year-old. His bases were thick. He was heavy.
And
I can't seem to shoot a buck that's got all his points left on.
Yeah.
I go after the scrappers,
Yeah, that was a beautiful buck you killed last weekend. And
yeah.
It sucks when they're like that, but I guess that's part of their story.
It is. I mean, I don't get to. He wasn't going to score 130 inches or whatever, but I mean, it's my best buck. It's a shame that he had a broken time, but it wasn't going to stop me from shooting him. I mean, I went out this season my goal was to fill the freezer with those, and I've done that, and shoot a nice buck.
How big is your freezer, by the way?
I got a pretty good sized chest freezer.
I bet you do.
Yeah, that some bitch is full. And once we actually grind meat and put mixed pork fat, that's going to add. It probably going to take. It's 40% of your burger is going to be pork fat. So I'm going to basically double my meat when we do our grinding, and I might need a second freezer.
Yeah,
but I love it, and I like processing it all and then giving it away, because I think a lot of times if I was to just give a deer to someone, you don't know how that's going to get processed. You don't know how it's going to be, and they might not have the best experience with how they think it tasted or how the meat was.
Yeah.
So to me, like I get a lot of enjoyment out of going through the whole process, making the sausage, making the burger, whatever we're making, and then giving it to people to eat, and they're like, man, this is incredible. Because it's that whole I get a real kick out of the whole process of and that's a whole nother conversation, but we're getting into that here in about a month. We'll be doing processing of all of our burger and making sausage and things like that, so that'll be a fun thing to discuss too, because we're going to do some different stuff with that as a group out here this year too. So yeah, man.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Me
like
too.
Like I said, it's pretty much my favorite part of the year next week, so
yep, should be a good time. So thanks for sitting down with me and having me in your lovely man cave down here. And let's freaking kick some ass next week.
All right, buddy.
All right.
Let's do it.
See ya.